Good. Cool. All right. Welcome back. Government Operations, Military Affairs. 16th of January. We are here with our friends from the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs for an introduction about what they do and how they engage with this committee and what your role is for our county officers, state's attorneys, and sheriffs. And with that, we will bypass the around the horn and just throw it straight to you.
Well, thank you for having us in. Tim Leaders-Dumont, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, Executive Director as of Monday. And good to have you all here and seeing some familiar faces in the room. And you continue to have one of the most hospitable rooms for testimony. Thank you for continuing to be in here. I didn't get confused.
Don't get used to it.
Yeah.
Moving.
With us in the room is Tracy Patno, our Director of Sheriff Operations, created by an act that you all assisted with a couple of years ago, Act 30, which Annie will definitely come back and talk to you about in more detail. And Annie will quickly run you through structure of the department, and then I'll give you a little bit of context and then any questions.
Beautiful.
For the record, Annie Noonan, I'm with the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. I serve in the role of Labor Relations and Operations Director and sort of jack of all trades, master of none. But happy to be here for GovOps. Thank you. Probably the easiest way to talk about the department is to break it up as to how our budgets work. Which is that we have a budget for the state's attorneys, the sheriffs, victim advocates, and the special investigation units that were created around 2010. We are the administrative department that oversees the 28 elected officials. So the 14 state's attorneys and the 14 sheriffs. I suspect, I was not around at the time many years ago, that the department was created so that you didn't get requests for 28 separate entities for their budgets. So we have the money, all the money flows through our department. What you provide for the for support, as a reminder, is the elected officials, which are the 14 state's attorneys and 14 sheriffs. Their salaries are set by statute. You vote on that every year. You look at what they're earning. You make decisions about the statutory. They're all basically, essentially all paid the same, with only very minor variation. And that may be for something like a sheriff who is not certified by the Criminal Justice Training Council is paid less, depending, and that was just recently enacted in terms of a reduction in salary. One of the things that you may find interesting is that a state's attorney does not need to be an attorney, and a sheriff does not need to be a certified law enforcement officer. There have been discussions about that. It would be very difficult in some ways to have a state's attorney who is not a practicing attorney, since they are fully in the rotation of handling cases. And Tim's going to talk to you a little bit about our caseload. We have a central office. Our role is, as I said, administrative, but we also provide legal support. We have an appellate attorney. Tim is an attorney, provide guidance to the offices. We do public records requests. We handle appeals, as I said. We basically try to be a one-stop shop for all of them, for advice, and even in things like public records and all of that. So there's about 10 people that work over at the central office. We have one fiscal manager. We have one person who pays the sheriff's bills. We have Tracy as our sheriff operations person, created through Act 30. We have one person who handles the SIU grants. So we're basically a pass-through agency for the SIUs. So in essence, that's why the department was set up, was so that you didn't have to have all of that coming at you from 28 elected officials. And I think that obviously made some sense. With that, I'm going to stop and turn this over to Tim, but we're both here for questions, and thank you.
Okay, any questions on the structure of the department?
I do want to say one other thing. So a number of years ago, the Vermont Supreme Court issued a decision called In Re Election. And as a result of that decision, our department has we had to have our own labor relations division, which is how I wound up getting hired, because the Supreme Court case came out, and then the Department of Human Resources said, well, the court seems to think you're county employees. And that's because all of our officials run as county elected people. The strange thing with that is that all of our employees are state employees. They all have state employee numbers. But there's not for our state's attorney side, because this came up as a result of the state's attorneys organizing, and our employees are covered by union contracts with the SEA. And, proudly we say we've settled all of our contracts without even having to go to mediation. We settled them at the bargaining table. We've been very successful. Three contracts with the state's attorneys, two with the sheriff's transport deputies. So that decision just kind of put us in this very strange thing where we have a fair amount of autonomy in terms of decisions that we can make around personnel issues, but we still do things like our employees file state timesheets. They're covered by state insurance and health insurance, retirement, all of that. So we're this very weird hybrid of a collective group of employees. And it's not really all that critical, except you may see things in our budget or in our conversations with you that say, well, because of in-ray election, that's why we did that. So just if you remember that, if I ever tell you that again, you'll know why.
Yeah, and in that vein of unique state government entities, most other states do not have a department that serves both elected county sheriffs and elected county state's attorneys. And so we do our best and to do that. And there's a lot of crossover, policy, advocacy, obviously deeply involved in the criminal adjudication across the state. And in that vein, right now we have, as Andy said, we have 175 employees. Of that group, 72 are attorneys that work full-time doing criminal, family, civil, appellate, and post-conviction relief cases in the civil division. They average between 300 to 400 cases per attorney. That's been very consistent the last 3 years. It's an incredibly high number, and national best practices say something like 150 to 200 is appropriate. That is the backlog that existed before COVID. So when people come in and say the COVID backlog existed before COVID, and it's still with us, COVID made it worse. But 300 to 400 cases per attorney, that's misdemeanors, felonies, post-conviction relief cases. In the family division, it's CHINs, children in need of care and supervision. It's juvenile delinquencies and youthful offender. We cover everything. And that same group of deputies are masters of a lot of different trades in the legal profession. And it means that, if you think about the judicial system, we're in the criminal division, we're in the civil division doing post-conviction relief, we're in the family division, and we're in the Supreme Court here in Montpelier doing appeals. So we're across the spectrum. We do 99% of the pending cases in the system at our department. And the 26 victim advocates that we have work with all of our victims of crime in Vermont. 600 cases per victim advocate in the state right now. And that doesn't include, one case could have many victims. So they have incredibly high caseloads as well. Annie will come back at a future time in further detail some of the asks that we'll be making, but we certainly need further support. As Annie pointed out, the transport deputies, we have 24 transport deputies, and they help get people to and from court across the state. And sometimes you can't get there from here, but they do get there from here every single day. And, weather, all types of weather, and Annie gets their calls about what their lives are like, and it is difficult work. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we have 96 pending homicides as of December 10th. That's a huge driver of work. Some states, there is pure homicide attorneys. That's all they do. In Vermont, it's a group effort in each of the offices. Some of our offices have one state's attorney, one deputy. Some of our part-time offices have just the state's attorney themselves. And some of our offices are just, they're drowning in work right now. And we have seen over the last 3 years, 20 homicide victims each of the last 3 years. 2021, we had 11. So there's been an uptick in violent crime that we're experiencing, and it's borne out by the data that we've seen, really a 10 to 12-year trend of violent crime on the increase in Vermont. There was an FBI heat map a couple of years ago that CSG put together, and it actually showed that we were on the up. New York was on the up. Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts were all on the downside in terms of violent crime. And there's maybe a lot of reasons for that, but we're experiencing it and we're feeling it here in Vermont. Obviously, we've had issues with drug-related homicides over the last few years in particular. It used to be that you would see, we still see an unfortunately high amount of domestic violence homicide victims, and we do the domestic violence cases across the state. Drug-related homicides are really on the uptick, overlaps with issues with guns in the state of Vermont as well, and firearms that we're seeing. So we're working on a number of different areas to try to mitigate some of this. And you'll see some of that come out of House Judiciary upstairs, some of the solutions we're working on. But the backlog is exacerbating everything that we're experiencing. Misdemeanors are not finding their way through the system right now. We increased the number of trials over the last year by 65% in terms of trial date utilization. That's great news. We're having more trials. We're having more opportunities for disposition. Our clearance rate over 100% over the last year. We're moving more cases than we're putting in. but we've only moved 3,000 cases over the last year. 26,000 cases were pending a year ago, 23,000 pending are pending right now. To truly make progress with backlog, it would need to be something like 200% in terms of the clearance rate. So we're doing our best out there, and we really are on the front lines in terms of violent crime across the state, everything from a downtown disorderly conduct, retail theft to a homicide. And it's, when I was a deputy here in Washington County, one day I was dealing with DUIs, and the next day I was assigned a double homicide from a few years prior that had become ripened in terms of the investigation. So it's a great training ground to become an attorney in the state, but we do experience, as Annie will tell you, we do experience burnout, difficult subject matter, and obviously violent crime has side effects. Yeah, two of the other areas, Annie's whispering to me, keeping me on track. Two of the other areas that may come up in your communities. Last year, there were some changes made to the bail law that you all hear about. I know the chair and I have discussed these issues, but the reminder on bail, it cannot be used for public safety. It's only to mitigate the risk of flight. Last year, for what I would call repeat offenders, the $200 limit was removed if you have another pending case, meaning for the first time person through the system, they have the $200 limit still for expungible misdemeanors. But for individuals who come back through, judges may impose an amount of bail that's appropriate under the law, but they can impose bail greater than $200, something to communicate to your community members because there's often confusion and the law changed very recently. Another area, violations of conditions of release, is something that really should have always been accounted for in the bail imposition analysis by judges. Last year, you all made that law in the statutory analysis, what they call non-compliance with court orders, is now something that judges need to consider when they're engaging with the conditions of release and bail imposition analysis. We've seen that some of these issues have, as the date draws further away from the date that you all passed it, there's greater acceptance of some of these practices. And pretrial detention, pretrial bail imposition is never about punishment constitutionally, it's about engagement with the system. We had something like 5,000 failure to appear arrest warrants last year. That dragged down that system that we all need to keep moving so effectively. And we are seeing frustration in our communities with misdemeanors not really making their way through. If you have a misdemeanor retail theft, that's a case with a victim that's impacted a downtown. Those are not making their way through the system. The felonies are. And so you're going to probably hear us come back at some point and talk about opportunities for misdemeanor disposition and misdemeanor trial. We do have some folks with 50, 60, 70 pending dockets in the court system who have failed at a diversion, and the judges and the state's attorneys and probably the defense bar is at a loss in terms of what to do. But it is a three-pronged stool. We all need to work together to get there. And the blame game doesn't help with the backlog so much. So I think we're all in it together on trying to find solutions that we are interested in coming to. And I think that was, the other thing I wanted to mention is sealing and expungement. And something like 70,000 orders for sealing or expungement over the last 5 years. When you see a case get sealed or expunged, a case dismissed results in sealing or expungement, depending on the way that it's dismissed. That actually requires our paralegals and our admins and our attorneys to go in, and if it's only a partial expungement, okay, count one, I'm going to take a Sharpie to that. And the case files are huge. This is a huge amount of work that happens after the case is effectively done that we all have to do to comply with the law. So you will hear us come back in that we need more support for paralegals and admins to comply with the law. The other thing is there's some absurdities in the expungement law, including a finding of not guilty in a trial. Let's say count one. I always used to use Connor Casey in corrections as my hypothetical defendant, but
Why would you ever do that?
But let's just say that the chair had disorderly conduct downtown. He had a retail theft downtown. Count one, you're found not guilty. That gets expunged. So when he comes back and asks our office for the record, under the law, we have to say no such record exists and never did exist. And while that's great, it's also a bit absurd, right? To tell a defendant who experienced the trial in public court that that did not happen to them. Also is a problem if we get sued in the future. We don't have the records anymore. So the sealing system is what we need to move to. We have a bill H655 from last year that we've made some recommendations to improve. Will greatly alleviate some of the administrative issues and the labor issues that we're seeing in terms of the time that it takes to comply with the expungement law. And that is sitting in House, actually, the chair of House Judiciary would tell you that it's sitting in Senate Judiciary because he's not going to take it up until they send it to them. But the ceiling bill will be brought up this year. It'll probably be something, I think the governor mentioned it in his press conference yesterday. So we are keenly interested in moving in that direction. It makes policy and legal sense. It also is in better compliance with Brady Giglio under the Constitution. When someone needs their Brady Giglio material, if you've expunged it, we know about it, but we can't give it to you. So it's a bit of an issue on that front too. Any questions on that? Anything I missed?
Let's, for the new folks, Brady Giglio immersion real quick. I got a funny feeling not everybody knows what that hit was.
Brady Giglio is the name of the two cases that established the constitutional right. Defendants need access to certain discovery that could mitigate their guilt, make their sentence a little lighter, or impact other aspects of going through that system in terms of impeaching a witness on the stand, for example. People often think about it in the law enforcement context, but Brady Giglio applies to every witness who could possibly come before the court. When we're deleting records and then we get a request for discovery for records, and we know those records are actually relevant to the person's credibility, trustworthiness, if they've had a false information charge in the past to a police officer and it's been expunged, we have to make a choice. Do we comply with the Constitution or comply with Vermont law in terms of the expungement statute? And if we complied with Vermont law, we're actually offending the US Constitution and due process. So we've been dealing with that the last few years because we are human beings. We can't delete instances from our memory and our mind. And so that's some of what we've been dealing with. Evan Meenan, when he was in the State House advocating on some of these issues, we've been talking about this for a number of years. And so we do think there's a critical mass of folks in the building that have experienced it in some way. People still need their second and third chances in terms of having opportunities for housing and employment, but we also need to balance the opportunities to not have a system that's difficult to comply with and offending federal laws.
Thank you for that, Director. Said that for the first time on record. Good. Congratulations.
Good to see you.
All right. With that, like I said, we're keeping this one to speed dating. We will bring you back sooner than later to talk about policy priorities. And once we know a little bit more about the executive order that came down with the restructuring of the Department of Public Safety and other departments into an agency.
Thank you. Even an org chart here. I know everything's supposed to be digital. It's on your website as well, but something like the org.
Yes.
Thank
And
you
I'm going to
very
say that
much.
to members also. We have some amazing,
How are you?
they provided some really good immersive material for new members.